Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday. We're so happy to see you all. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, but in the meantime, we have a chat box question. So I believe Saturday or Sunday was the first day of fall. So we would love to know, what organization are you with? Where are you from in the state? And what is your favorite fall activity? So go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat, and we'll get started in just a moment. All right, if you haven't introduced yourself, you can still have time, but I just love reading your answers. It's like a breath of fresh air after this hot summer. I can't wait to carve pumpkins and take cool evening walks, and feels like such a nice transition. So thank you to everyone who's on today's webinar. And just to introduce you, my name's Dana Bryant. I'm with Volunteer West Virginia, and I'm joined by Gina. She's our disaster services coordinator, and she's going to be on today's webinar. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box and Gina will help to answer it. Or if you need to leave, or if your internet gets kicked off, Gina will let you back in from the waiting room. So we are here to help you. So if this is your first time here, welcome to our webinar series. This is a free monthly training series we do at Volunteer West Virginia, where we explain our programs. We're a small state agency located in Charleston. We network and provide trainings, and most of all, we have fun. So this is going to be a really laid back hour, a nice use of your time. So it's just an informal gathering of West Virginians and volunteers from across the state. We have some really good topics coming up over the next year. I can't believe the year is almost over, but in October, we're going to have the Volunteer Management Life Cycle with Shannon Stober. This is going to be a really useful training topic if you work with volunteers. And then in November, this is one of our most popular training opportunities. It's our grant writing nuts and bolts. And this is going to be a 2-hour grant writing training with Nikki from the Grant Advantage. And this is a free version of our paid for grant writing training. So if you've never attended, be sure to sign up for that. This one's so popular. I think we have over 200 people register each year. So be sure to put that on your calendar. You're not going to want to miss it. And then in December, if you can think that far ahead, I can't, we're going to have our winter networking hot cocoa hour. So it'll be a nice use of time just to relax in the midst of the holidays and to meet other leaders in the state. So if you haven't done so already, you can register on our website and get signed up. And today's topic is going to be all about preparedness. So September is National Preparedness Month. So one of our goals here at Volunteer West Virginia is to help West Virginians get prepared through the Ready West Virginia program, which Gina oversees. So today's topic is Get Ready West Virginia. And this year we wanted to focus on something a little bit different. We're talking about preparedness considerations for people with disabilities, seniors, and caregivers. So we cast a wide net. We're going to have a really nice group of presenters from FEMA, 2 different presenters, and then we're going to wind up our hour with Senior Corps, and they're going to talk about different ways that seniors can volunteer in their community through AmeriCorps Seniors. So you're not going to want to miss that. It's going to be a really great hour. So here's today's agenda. We're going to start off with preparedness for people with disabilities. And then we're going to look into the disaster preparedness guide for caregivers. This is new through FEMA. So we're going to share that resource with you all so you can bring it into your communities. And then lastly, we're going to meet the AmeriCorps Seniors team. They are so lovely. They're going to be calling in from Parkersburg today, and they're going to explain their 3 different programs, what AmeriCorps Seniors do in the state, and how you can get involved in your community. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Sherman Gillums. He is with the FEMA Director of the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, and he is going to share some information about preparedness for people with disabilities. So hi, Sherman, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. It's so exciting to see so many people taking part in our campaign to ensure that the nation is prepared. And we're going to talk about that over the next few minutes. Next slide, please.
Sherman, we're lucky to have you.
That picture there, just to give you a sort of a visual of who I am a military veteran. I do navigate life in a wheelchair, which is pretty important because my role involves ensuring that FEMA accounts for the needs of people with disabilities of all walks, not just people in wheelchairs, but people who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, and any number of cognitive and developmental functionalities that require assistance. Next slide, please. As was mentioned at the outset, I am the director of the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, but I also wear another, probably more important hat, and that's the disability coordinator that was established under the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act after Hurricane Katrina. What was remarkable about that storm is that people who were disabled or older suffered a higher rate of injury or death, in large part due to abandonment because of a disability, not because of the storm, but because they couldn't escape and they couldn't, and the structure wasn't there to support many of them. And so after Hurricane Katrina in 2005 occurred, Congress passed this new law that ensured that there will be one person responsible, and that's me right now, for ensuring that we consider people with disabilities in our planning and our execution of disaster response. Next slide. I'll just briefly go through the evolution of this disability integration mission, is what we call it. As I said before, it started in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. But as you can see in this timeline, it's really evolved from being one person at a desk to an entire fleet or a cadre of people that we have go to disasters to ensure that emergency shelters, disaster recovery centers, even spaces where people continue to stay in their homes, that they have as much access to all the services and supports that we offer survivors who don't have disabilities. And so this is just an illustration of how we've evolved as a mission in the agency. Next slide, please. I use this snapshot to give a scope and a scale to why we do this work. Last year was a record year for billion-dollar disasters. While disasters weren't new, where they were occurring, how frequently they were occurring, how intense they were, and how costly they were in terms of infrastructure that wasn't prepared to deal with various floods, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes that were happening at greater frequency. And so last year we had a record year. That's important to consider when you think about the number of people in the country who identify as disabled. These are people who are, as I said before, have any number of ways that they function differently. But the more important aspect of this is they're also living more independently. The community living movement has been great. It's worked, but the consequence of that is when disasters happen, these people may find themselves more isolated than before, and they have to basically rely on what the structure has to offer in times of crisis. And this is what we want to consider as we think about the nature of changes in weather and how it's impacting entire communities is occurring. Next slide, please. Now, who is disabled for the purpose of emergency response? Well, we look at the U.S. Census by county to determine who has a disability or reported as disabled. And more importantly, what's the nature of the disability? In some places, we have a concentration of residents who are deaf and rely on sign language. You may have schools or areas where people settle because they have universities or research institutions and they cluster around certain hospitals. We see this with veterans all the time. They cluster around facilities where services are available. So we want to take into account not only how many people have disabilities, but what the nature of those disabilities happen to be. We also look at something very important. When the power goes out, we want to know who are the people that are in the highest danger. We can talk about people with dialysis, people who are reliant on oxygen, you know, people who have Lou Gehrig's disease that use percussion vests to breathe. All these individuals are the folks we want to account for, and in particular, those that are maybe on the lower socioeconomic spectrum, those who may be of minoritized identities, who find themselves at the highest risk for any number of reasons. But when you add disability to it, it becomes exponentially higher. And where they're located is important. And we also look at who we've helped before, who we've reached now, and who we haven't reached in terms of the numbers of people who are impacted. So we rely on risk assessment data to tell us not just what services are needed, but the extent to which it's needed and where it's needed. Next slide, please. Now, this is really important here because I want to get to the bare bones about what people who I just outlined fall within the scope of that mission need to consider. And I just want to go through a quick list of things that we want folks to consider. How are you getting your information, right? TV, radio, internet, those all have value, but by themselves may need to be supplemented with other ways to find out what's the latest, what's the governor saying, what's the local sheriff saying, things like that. How will I evacuate? And these are questions you can't ask as the disaster is happening or right before it happens. You have to think about, is public transportation going to be available? Does my own vehicle, is that going to be adequate? You know, do I have to pay a service, an ambulance service, things like that? And if you can't evacuate, who's going to come to make sure that I'm okay? This is where neighbors become the first responders in disasters because they're the first ones there. They're the first ones who are going to know where a neighbor is who may be, you know, housebound or in a wheelchair, and maybe the porch area is destroyed. So we want to think about things like that, especially when we talk about situations where there's low vision because of power outages and where there's extreme heat or cold in some situations because people with disabilities die faster, frankly, in these when these occur. And then we want to look at, if I can't evacuate, where will I go and what will I need and who I need to take with me? Do I need my personal care attendant with me? Do I need my service animal with me? What do I need to take? I always tell folks, think about if you went on a cruise for 30 days. What types of things would you need to have with you to get through in that situation? Well, a similar situation is going to occur when you have to move from your home into an emergency shelter for a temporary period, right? And then who am I going to contact, or who are people going to contact so that my immediate concerns get addressed, right? Your family, your spouse, all those people know you as well as you know yourself. And when you get amongst strangers or you're in a situation where people don't know your needs, it's going to be hard to have those addressed. Next slide, please. This is important. How am I going to convey my needs to first responders? And this could be wearing a medical alert bracelet. If you rely on hearing aids or sign language, we're going to have to find a way to get those services to you so we can hear what you'll need to start your recovery. Coordinating care continuity. These are people like me, perhaps, who have ongoing care needs that can't be disrupted by the disaster. Or if it is, I need to let somebody know, look, I have a heart problem. I need to make sure that I can get my medications from another pharmacy or another source. So I need to be able to do that. And you want to be able to convey that to somebody. Your durable medical equipment concerns, you know, some people sleep in hospital beds that are plugged in. Some people use, you know, power wheelchairs, things like that. We want to look at how are we going to charge those things in the event you're in a shelter. There's got to be electricity. We got to make sure you get to a shelter where there is electricity. So we want to think about that in advance when you're thinking about where to go. And then keeping your pertinent medical information readily accessible in case you become incapacitated or there are decisions that someone has to make in order to treat you, but they have to know other things about you or about your medical history to do that. So you want to think about how you would store that on a device where a medical person could access it, or in a cloud system, a web-based system where you put in a password and a username, and someone could get access to that. That's really important. And one big one is if you use wheelchairs or any kind of durable medical equipment, you got to have serial numbers. If it gets damaged and needs to be replaced, the fastest way to get the nomenclature for that medical item is to have the serial number. So something I didn't think about until later on in life. I don't know where to even find my serial number half the time, but taking the time to do that will spare you in the future in case you have to get that equipment replaced. And then who's going to case manage? When you get through the storm, you get through the evacuation process and you're settling back in, you're going to need help. If you have a social worker working with you now, or if you're part of a Centers for Independent Living, those can be helpful. But if you're a person who isn't used to having people intervene on your behalf. You'll want to think about what supports and programs are out there that will be able to help you and will be relevant to your particular circumstance. Next slide. One really great thing we did last year is we released 2 preparedness guides, one for older adults, one for caregivers, and my colleague, Nicole Borland, is going to talk all about that at length. I just want to put up the links and the cover pages, but these are our attempt to empower you with information where you're making the decision about how you will get through the storm and recover. It's really important that autonomy and independence be a part of this throughout, and it's my job to find ways to ensure that the community, once mobilized, also has the ability to answer the questions for themselves and what they need the most. And Nicole's going to talk a little bit about that. And I think this is the last slide coming up. For those of you who are inclined to do a little training, we offer Independent Study 368A, which is a revised training program titled Including People with Disabilities in Disaster Operations. Our original purpose was to give first responders a way to learn a little bit more about how we incorporate people with disabilities in planning, in the execution, in the recovery process, but it's really ideal for anybody who thinks that he or she may find themselves in a situation where you're going to be an advocate for people with disabilities when a disaster or if a disaster impacts your community. Next slide. This may be the last one. And that's the last one. There's my information. If anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to answer any questions I can't get to today. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherman. It was so great meeting you, and thank you for your service and for continuing to help individuals with disabilities. And it was a really great presentation, so we really appreciate it. All right, so now we're just going to move along to our next presenter. We are lucky to have Nicole Borland. She is with the FEMA Office of External Affairs, Public Affairs Specialist, and she helps with the READY campaign. And she's going to be introducing the Disaster Preparedness Guide for Caregivers. So welcome, Nicole.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really, it's exciting to see so many different volunteer organizations represented in the chat. I like all of those fall opportunities too, and I am an outlier because I do like candy corn, but don't tell anyone, especially not my dentist. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Disaster Preparedness Guide for Caregivers. Next slide. Now, this care guide was designed to give caregivers what they need to navigate disasters and make sure that they have the information and resources and simple checklists they can fill out to make sure the people they are caring for have the things they need. And also, we seek to address the unique challenges that caregivers face with practical solutions. And we also provide them even tips for self-care. Next slide. Now we know that people today, and I know that Sherman touched on this, 53 million Americans are providing care in some capacity for someone who is ill, someone who has a disability, or an older adult. And we do know that these individuals are some of the most vulnerable in the country if a disaster happens. Now, all of these people have unique needs and challenges to prepare for emergencies and disasters. And we know that caregivers navigate complex systems and plan for unexpected every day. And this experience will come in handy in the event of a disaster. You may already be further along in your preparedness journey than you think. You know, as Sherman mentioned, having things like thinking about, well, you know, if I'm going on a cruise, I love that analogy. Like, do I have a backup battery? Do I have, like, for instance, if you have to charge something, an extra long extension cord and things like that. So we want people to use this guide to think about disaster preparedness and identify the needs in advance so you can take care of your care recipient and understand how their needs might change in the disaster. And in turn, this gives caregivers a feeling of being more prepared and in control when disaster strikes. So today I'm just going to give a brief overview of the proactive disaster preparedness and tools featured in the guide to ensure the safety and well-being of caregivers and their care recipients. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of text on this slide, so I will give everybody a little time to digest it. We understand that caregivers have myriad barriers to overcome when preparing those that they care for emergency disasters. Not all caregiving experiences are the same, and the information and resources in this guide reflect that. As a family caregiver, you're used to handling unexpected. You know circumstances might change quickly, sometimes day to day and hour by hour. You already know, or you're starting to learn how to navigate complex systems to help your care recipient lead a fulfilling and meaningful life. Can we go to the next slide? Because again, it's a lot of text. So we want people to understand, like really sit down and think about the barriers that they have to preparedness. Like you need to understand your care recipient's unique risks. You need to understand, their preferences, the needs that they have for communication, for power, for medicine, for transportation. Next slide. Oh, let me catch up. Okay. Now, while caregiving can be overwhelming at times, we're asking people to take 3 essential steps: assessing needs, engaging a support network, and creating a plan. And this can empower you to prepare today before something happens. We broke down these actions into 3 essential steps to understand what you need, where to find resources, and make plans that suit your and your care recipient's needs. So those are identify barrier and risks, learn and connect, and make a plan. Next slide. Okay. Again, there's a lot. And I really urge everybody to go to ready.gov/caregivers and ready.gov/older adults, where we have both guides that we were talking about earlier. So it's really very helpful. And I don't want to make you have to memorize this entire slide. So step 1 of this guide focuses on identifying barriers and risks, provides insights that will help you overcome challenges, and most importantly, gives you the tools to build resilience for yourself and your care recipients. You need to think about, like, how are you going to communicate your needs to other? And Sherman really touched on this very eloquently. How are you going to communicate your needs? Does this change in a stressful situation? Like, for instance, if you have, so let's say you're taking care of an adult child with autism who is nonverbal. If you have to know, like, how are you going to make sure that in a stressful situation, in a disaster situation, you can advocate for them and communicate, on their behalf if needed, and make people understand that the limitations they might have in communications. Do you have the money to cover expenses such as relocation, extra medication, and things like extra glasses, extra, if you have like a wheelchair you can take with you that isn't motorized, if in case the power goes out. And then how are you going to communicate the pain or when you're exposed to extreme temperatures? So you need to know, like, if you are someone you're caregiving to is nonverbal or has problems either recognizing or talking about or expressing that they're in pain, recognizing the signs that they have, that they are too cold or that they are too hot, even if they are unable to do so themselves. And you need to do things like understand medical equipment and medical needs of the person. And so this guide will really help you, like, go through these different sections and make considerations for each one. Okay, next slide. Learn and connect. And this is what webinars like this are an important part of learning and connecting. We learn and connect with each other. I always like to say, without people, a community is just buildings and roads. And we know that knowledge is power, and the time to learn what resources are available and how to connect is before disasters happen. And this is a great, again, example of doing that. You're being proactive, you're getting together, you're learning resources. I love seeing webinars like this. So now that you've finished step 1 and you've assessed your barriers and the risks that you might face, step 2 will help you assess preparedness roles, learn the resources you have to meet these needs, and provide guidance on fostering collaborative approaches to preparedness. If you're a solo caregiver, now is the time to start building connections to create a support network, like Sherman talked about. Make sure your neighbors know, hey, I use a wheelchair and it's dependent on power. I had a friend who used an oxygen device that was dependent on power. So she reached out to her local community or like her local emergency management department, who was able to advise her on small generators or ways to access power to power this device in the event of an emergency. So now is the time, especially if you're a solo caregiver, to start reaching out in your community to find out what organizations, even friends or families, can help you fill the gaps that you have in your preparedness. Now, it's terribly important that you discuss emergency roles, like who is going to do what if a disaster happens. God forbid, a disaster happens and the person you're caring for at home is with like a temporary caregiver, like a part-time nurse that comes in, and you're at the grocery store. Do you have a friend or neighbor who can come stay with the person you're caring for until you can get home? You need to understand how to get alerts, get places where you get reliable, trustworthy alerts, either from your community alert systems, the National Weather Service, the FEMA app. I always recommend people download the FEMA app. It's free. So you need to, and also, this is not to say you should also watch your local TV station. Your local news is going to cover disasters and emergencies that are going to affect you. They are going to be on the air telling you where to go, what roads are closed. So make sure that you follow your local news as well. Now, just like we're all doing today, attend community preparedness presentations, meetings, webinars, get involved in your community, meet with local emergency responders when they have events like Touch a Truck or open houses. Try to get out there and talk to them. A lot of times they will have resources like you can sign up to mark yourself or your person you're caring for as somebody who's going to need extra help evacuating, or somebody who's going to need extra help if there's an emergency. So take this time before a disaster to start building these connections, because you never know when it's going to come in handy. Okay, next slide. Now that you've done a thorough risk assessment and identified the resources available to you, you're ready to make a plan. Now, this plan should include building a kit, and the kit should be very specific to your needs and the needs of the person you're caring for. Everybody has unique needs. Not everybody's going to need the same things. There's no reason to put unnecessary items in your kit because it might be heavy or hard to transport. So make sure you know like the need to have versus the good to have. Need to have your medications, your durable medical equipment. If you have a service animal, supplies for that service animal. When we talk about, for instance, making a kit for kids, it's nice to have your favorite stuffed animal, but it's critical to make sure that they have nutritious food. So when at all possible, when you're talking with your family and friends and building this plan and building a support network, be honest and open about the process and the role you will take and you're willing to play, and that they are willing to play when making this plan. Now, we talk about evacuating a lot, but do we have plans if you have to stay at home? Things like battery backups. I know that I have a cell phone emergency charger. You charge in advance and you can plug your phone into it if need be. Do you have things like this at home, or can you go somewhere and access it? Go to a neighbor's house, who has a generator, and they'll let you plug something into to charge. Make sure that you have things on hand if you do have to stay at home for a while. For instance, if the power goes out, sometimes the plumbing goes out. And if the plumbing goes out, you can't use your toilet sometimes. So do you have a plan, a way to, perform basic everyday needs, cleaning supplies, sanitary supplies, and things like that, to make sure that you have on hand. So if you cannot leave, and we always advise that if you can leave, please do so, and do so in as quickly as possible. But as we've discussed, sometimes it's hard for people to leave. Some people don't have transportation. Some people, have needs so great that it would take an ambulance service to evacuate them. So as a caregiver, you need to be really honest with yourself, like, what am I actually going to need to keep this person safe and comfortable if something happens and we need to stay at home? Now, when you're talking, we talk a lot about resources, and it's important to go to places like your state Department of like disabilities. FEMA's got a lot of great resource, like look into the resources that are available to you. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel if something is available. This is a time to be curious, poke around on websites, see what resources are actually out there and available to you. Start engaging with the people who run these programs so that you can learn the kinds of things that are available to you. Because a lot of times it's not something you would just intuitively know. For instance, this winter, we had a webinar about extreme cold, how communities and individuals can prepare for and react to extreme cold. And I learned in doing research for the webinar, there are tax breaks for like weatherizing your house. And I didn't know that. And I figured if I don't know that, and I work at FEMA and I talk about preparedness all day, that means most of the public probably doesn't know that either. And it was just because I was poking around. So ask what resources are available. Don't be shy about asking, like, can I get this? Do you know where I can get that? Do you know somebody who knows where to get that? Because that's the way you, first of all, build connections, build relationships, and get what you actually need. Next slide. I want to talk about some other resources that are available out here. Now, I may have mentioned that we worked with the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. This is a great institution, and they have a lot of resources and documents for people, not only in the caregiver communities, but for older adults. And here we have military caregivers. Now, a lot of military caregivers have different challenges than some others. Like they may have to deal with extreme PTSD, brain injuries. So and I think we know that sometimes big systems like Veterans Administration, VA, is hard to navigate. So they created this guide so that people who are taking care of military personnel after, an event or a medical emergency have what they need to support their veteran. Next slide. Okay, here are two more great resources. Obviously, go to ready.gov, but obviously the Rosalind Carter Institute has done a lot of work. They have the four-kind networks. It's current and former caregivers. It's a great way to reach out and learn from each other. They provide connection. You get compassionate advice. You can help amplify your voice or the person you're caring for. And I seriously, if you go to the Four Kinds Rosalind Carter Institute link, you can find all sorts of helpful information. And it's also important that caregivers understand that they are under a lot of stress. I mean, not only do you have your everyday responsibilities, you may care for young children, but also your parents, or have a full-time job, but also need to care for someone. So we know that it's important that caregivers take some time to take care of themselves. This is why Unwinding was developed. It's got resources to help you relax and work through issues so that you can take care of yourself. Like they say, on an airplane, you put your own oxygen mask on first. If you do not take care of yourself, you cannot take care of others. So we encourage people to use resources like this to find ways to take care of themselves. And as always, there's a crisis text line. You can text TOUGH to 741-741 and get free counseling, confidential counseling. Next slide. And finally, at FEMA, we love volunteers. We know that volunteers are there before a disaster even happens. We know that they're the first on the ground when something happens. And we know that they're going to be there long after the federal government is gone, When the news cameras leave, volunteers are still there. They do extraordinary work in their communities, large and small across the nation. And you embody our nation's goals of like compassion. You give selflessly and you strengthen the nation and improve lives. And we thank you for the critical work you do every day. And we also, I should say, we see you as trusted members of your community. Well, when we were developing this guide, we didn't just think it up. We worked with work groups and roundtables and members of the community to make sure that the guide was useful, something that would speak to the needs and address them. So I asked everybody to download this guide, to give it a look. There's also the older adults guide, which is, for individuals who are older. And the caregiver's guide is a great companion to it. But you can help caregivers do their work by spreading the message of the caregiver's guide. It helps them protect those they care for and themselves. And we know that these are some of the most vulnerable Americans, but in doing so, you're going to lay the foundation for an equitable response and recovery after a disaster. I think this is my last slide. Yep. Thank you very much.
It was. Thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. I loved all the resources you shared and your call to action of downloading the care guide. So if you're on today's call, be sure to copy that link so you can download it after today's webinar. It was wonderful. And I love your segue that volunteers are everyday heroes, because that's who we're going to be hearing from next. It is a great team of individuals that support volunteers across the state. And we're going to be hearing from AmeriCorps Seniors. You might know us at Volunteer West Virginia. We oversee the AmeriCorps state and national programs, but there's a whole AmeriCorps family tree. And one of our family members is AmeriCorps Seniors, and they have 3 different programs in the state with volunteers across West Virginia. So we're going to get to learn a little bit more about this program today. So I want to introduce Janet Somerville, Becky Edwards, and Reagan Shriver. She couldn't be here today, but she's the director of the Retired Senior Volunteer Program. And welcome to today's call. They are joining us from Parkersburg.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar. And Nicole and Sherman, what a valuable information that you passed on to us. Welcome to the AmeriCorps Senior Programs in West Virginia. The AmeriCorps Senior Programs, I'm sorry, next slide, I should have said, sorry. The AmeriCorps Seniors Programs are sponsored by local public agencies and private nonprofit organizations and funded through federal grants administered by the national AmeriCorps agencies. Sponsors provide local support through donations or in-kind services. Sponsors are community agencies and organizations dedicated to addressing problems in areas of need, such as disaster preparedness and relief, education and literacy, health and nutrition, public safety, respite, abuse and neglect, and many other areas. Total funding brought to West Virginia by these programs in 2022 was $3,373,799. Next slide. The 3 programs in West Virginia are made up of the AmeriCorps Seniors Directors Association. The mission of the AmeriCorps Seniors Association is to make a positive impact on the well-being of all West Virginians by promoting volunteerism that draws from the life experiences of citizens 55 and over. Next slide. Our goals are to facilitate independent living, to encourage and promote lifelong learning, to deliver services that nurture emotional and social well-being, to improve public safety through volunteer service and education, and to promote healthy lifestyles. Our association's purpose is to provide a state forum, focus, visibility, and advocacy for AmeriCorps Senior Programs, to establish a network of state communications among AmeriCorps Seniors projects as a link to national and regional AmeriCorps Seniors associations, to provide a vehicle for state expression and majority opinion on behalf of the AmeriCorps Senior Programs and volunteers to the National AmeriCorps Agency, the Commission on Aging, Congress, and other appropriate governmental agencies, regional and national, and to provide a vehicle to search out and apply for alternate sources of funding and support organizations. Next slide. The 3 AmeriCorps Senior Programs are the RSVP program, the Senior Companion Program, and the Foster Grandparent Program. The Foster Grandparent Program, it provides grants to organizations to engage low-income individuals aged 55 and over in providing one-on-one mentoring and academic support to children with special or exceptional needs. The RSVP program provides grants to organizations, and it's to engage Americans aged 55 and older in tutoring and mentoring youth responding to natural disasters, supporting veterans and their families, and meeting other critical needs. And also the Senior Companion Program, it provides grants to organizations to engage low-income Americans aged 55 and older in providing supportive, individualized services to help homebound seniors and other adults maintain their dignity and independence. Next slide. So the Foster Grandparent Program, it provides a way for low-income people aged 55 and older to serve as extended family members to children and youth with exceptional needs. The foster grandparents serve anywhere from 15 to 40 hours a week in schools, hospitals, daycares, and after-school programs. They help children who have been abused or neglected, mentor troubled teenagers or young mothers, tutor children with learning difficulties, and care for premature infants and children with physical disabilities. In return for their service, the foster grandparents receive a stipend of $4 an hour. They receive accident and liability insurance while on the volunteer station site, and also meals while on duty, reimbursement of transportation, and monthly training as well. Next slide. As you can see on this slide here, there is a foster grandparent here working with a child, and you can just see the love on their face and the connection they've made. Foster grandparent volunteers help children in their communities develop the academic and life skills that are critical to their development and future success. More than 30,000 foster grandparents tend to the needs of more than 275,000 young children and teenagers each year. Next slide. The Retired and Senior Volunteer Program. It is one of the largest volunteer efforts in the nation. It engages individuals 55 and older in a diverse range of volunteer activities. Volunteers organize neighborhood watch programs, tutor children, renovate homes, teach English, assist victims in natural disasters. They work food pantries and in a multitude of other ways. Through RSVP, more than 480,000 volunteers serve a few hours a week to nearly a full time at an estimated 65,000 local and national nonprofit groups, places of worship, and government agencies. Volunteers are not paid, but have accident and liability insurance while on duty. Sponsoring organizations may reimburse them for some of the costs incurred during service, and such as meals and transportation. Next slide, please. And you can see in the picture here, these volunteers are packing food boxes and care boxes. And through RSVP, more than 480,000 volunteers serve a few hours a week to more than full-time in an estimated 65,000 local and national nonprofit groups, places of worship, and government agencies. A day in activity for a retired and senior volunteer program at the food pantry, they could be either taking names, they could be filling boxes, they could be loading boxes in individuals' vehicles, but you can see it's a great opportunity for volunteers to give back to their communities. The next slide, please.
And now we come to the Senior Companion Program. The Senior Companion Program is very similar in that we are an income-based program, and volunteers receive a stipend of $4 an hour, and they also receive liability insurance and reimbursement for transportation and monthly training. These volunteers aren't seen out in the communities as much because they're often visiting with their clients one-on-one in homes. They provide companionship to adult clients and try to keep them living independently in their own homes. Next slide. Our Senior Companion volunteers assist individuals with daily living tasks such as meal preparation, light housekeeping, transportation to medical appointments, grocery stores, pharmacies, any necessary errands. Approximately 15,000 senior companions tend to the needs of more than 60,000 seniors each year. And here's some information of how to contact the AmeriCorps Seniors. Again, I'm Becky Edwards with the Senior Companion Program, and you heard from Janet Somerville from the Foster Grandparent Program. Please feel free to contact us. We can give you more information on volunteering and reaching out to other seniors or children in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky and Janet. That was awesome. So Senior Corps is a wonderful program. It's available throughout the state. So if you're caring for a senior that would like to volunteer, or if you're interested in volunteering, please reach out to Becky and Janet. They can definitely point you in the right direction. And it's just an awesome program. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Janet. It's Gina.
Yes.
Are those numbers that you talked about, are those national or are those just serving in West Virginia?
Those are national.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so if you have any questions for any of our presenters, I'll just leave the meeting open for a few more minutes. You can put them in the chat box or unmute yourself. We're pretty informal around here, but we wanted to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to put this survey in the chat box. If you'd love to leave feedback, do that. And we're going to be making our series for next year. So if there's a training you'd really like to have, you could put that in on our feedback survey, and we'll be reading that shortly. So that would help us for planning next year. Let me get that link. And thank you for sharing an hour of your day to get prepared this month for National Preparedness Month. So, Gina, any final thoughts? All right.
No, but I'm just so glad everyone came to participate and learn a little bit about being prepared. The bottom line is just think now about steps you can take to be prepared in case the power goes out, in case you have to shelter at home. What are the things you need to take care of yourself and your family? So that's just what I want to leave folks with and tell you all to have a great day.
All right, thanks, Gina. I'm going to give you all just one more second to grab the link and leave a nice message for today's presenters who volunteered their time to be with us. So thank you, Janet, Becky, Dr. Sherman, and Nicole. It was great meeting you, and I'll see you all next month.
My pleasure. Thank you.